in the area of registries is how incredibly flexible they are and can be molded to meet the particular situation for your clinical product. So here are some examples of that flexibility. Registries are usually prospective, meaning we tend to not know the outcomes before we start the study, but they can have some retrospective components, or in some cases be entirely retrospective. So an example of an entirely retrospective registry would be one that you run by chart review. Both the the baseline and the outcomes are already they've already occurred in the world, and we're just pulling them out of medical records. It's actually quite common for a registry to have a retrospective component. And what I mean by that is when we go out to our clinical sites to extract information, they're often pulling data from medical records at particular intervals. But we may not always know what the outcomes are going to be, but yet we are doing some component of retrospective medical review in order to gather our data. Registries are usually longitudinal. They follow patients over time, but the period of follow-up can actually be quite short or limited to a single brief episode of care, such as a hospitalization, an emergency room visit, something of that nature. There are many registries that are kind of hyper-longitudinal in the sense that they follow patients with chronic diseases for quite a long period. Registries are usually initiated after product approval. I tend to find that they're funded by marketing budgets, for example. But there are ways to start registries before a product has been approved. Now, obviously, you can't put a non-approved product into circulation without the equivalent of an NDA. But there are ways to start a registry if, for example, you exclude the product and just look at people with a particular disease. Then there's a way to start a registry before you've got your product on the market, and then potentially incorporate the use of that and or other product into the registry later on. Registries are customizable to the condition under study. So, for example, they can be set up in different circumstances, have different types of outcomes. One of the major design points that I find clients wrestling with is whether to focus on patients who are just getting treated with a product of interest, or whether to focus on everyone with a particular disease. One of the nice aspects of registries is that it's possible, just as with randomized trials, to set up a main study, but if there are questions that are of particular interest to certain sites or that don't require quite as large a sample size to address, it's also possible to set up sub-studies to address certain kinds of questions as well.